reckless businessmen with very little scruples who did nothing but jack up the prices of tickets and run people out of business. The truth may be somewhere within the middle, and it may not be. On the other hand, he is never less than entertaining and a chameleon of sorts. I'm kind of curious what Michael Cohl we're going to get here today. Are we going to get the amiable hippie, the businessman, the person that I know that is sharper than sharp, that's about 7 jumps ahead of about everybody else? But regardless, his feats over the years, if you have gone to a concert in North America in the last, say 20, 30 years, certainly, you've gone to a Michael Cohl presentation, even though his name wasn't on it. You were at a Michael Cohl show. Same thing with a lot of the Broadway shows right now. Not just Spider-Man, but there's other things, Rock of Ages, that he's working with as well, and a lot of television works. Welcome here.
Thank you. Nice to be back in Canada.
Glad to see the fan club showed up. I didn't know you had one, but...
big family. 4 kids, grandkids, big family.
This week the news is essentially the Rolling Stone tour. Paul Dainty not being able to come up, I guess, with the money along with Virgin and it going to AEG. You've, since 1989, did all the Rolling Stone tours. Do you feel like the little boy outside the window looking in, and did, you know, when it fell through, did you step in or try in any way to get this tour?
No. I don't feel like the little boy. I'm a bit old for feeling like the little boy. I actually kind of, you know, Laurie asked me how I felt about it, and actually Jane Stevenson asked me yesterday from The Sun the same thing, and I just said, you know, I've had a terrific relationship with the Stones for over 2 decades, and I lasted longer than any of Mick's wives, so it's pretty good. Maybe not as pretty as they were, but...
You didn't step in after Dainty lost and essentially went to AEG?
No. They went straight to AEG. I mean, AEG was trying to finance Dainty, and for whatever reason, you'd have to ask Paul. I don't know why, but he turned them down, so...
Now, you had to sit... when the initial anniversary was being put together, you sat down, obviously, and looked at the numbers. You were working alongside, I'm going to use the word alongside here, Live Nation. Obviously, somebody had to look at the figures. I understand Irving looked at the figures and said, this can't work. True?
Irving?
Azoff?
Nah. I don't think he ever looked at the figures, but... And if he did, he wouldn't know them, but he's not a promoter. He's never really been a promoter.
Okay,
But at the end of the day, I had a deal with Live Nation. We had a huge scrap. It's not any secret to anybody. We were, you know, on our way to court.
You stiffed them for $5 million.
I didn't stiff them for anything. They stiffed me for a contract. And read the court record. You'll see that at the end of the day, there's nobody wins in a situation like that. But ultimately, if there was a victor, it was us.
Okay, but maybe the word's not. So, yeah, the word is stiff, actually. You withheld 5.4 point...
That's not stiffing. That's not stiffing.
Oh.
If you want to get technical and be legal, which we don't necessarily want these people to listen to, or they don't want to listen to, at the end of the day, you have a right to not pay when you think the other party has breached the agreement.
Right. Agreed.
Stiffing is when you know you owe the money and you don't pay it.
Okay. Where do you stand with Live Nation today? You were a consultant. Your consultancy has ended.
I feel great. We've re-signed. I re-upped with them for 5 more years. I gave them my non-compete for 5 more years because my core interest these days and the core of what my company's doing is much more what I'll call broad demographic shows for arenas like Spider-Man, and we're working on Transformers and Ghostbusters and just a whole lot of other things that we think there's a whole opportunity to create a new platform of shows for the baby boomer grandparents and their kids and their grandkids. But as far as Live Nation's concerned, I get along great with Rapino and Arthur. We had a 2-year scrap, and we're best buddies again.
You're not in Arthur's film. In fact, when you watch...
I think it was made when we weren't buddies.
Okay, well, it may be, but when you watch the film, it's certainly a bit of a rewrite of history in a sense of it's like, gee, the Stones tour, U2, the early like that. Was Michael around? Oh, gosh, yeah, he seemed to be around, yeah. What was the relationship within those years between you and Arthur, I mean, it wasn't a partnership. You ran CPI along with, originally with Walensky and Bill Ballard and everything else.
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of different partners and a lot of people that contributed along the way. Ultimately, when Arthur first came to CPI, Norman was running the concert division. I'd moved myself aside to do some other things because I wasn't that keen on working with the club shows, and I was terrible at it, frankly. But I was much better at looking at the broader and the bigger picture. So originally he came in and he worked with Norman. But as we expanded and we went into the merchandise business, which Norman Perry had actually, he was probably the first merchandiser ever for rock music. It's unknown. And one day they'll honor him, he's Canadian, and they'll honor him and put him into the Music Hall of Fame, because when he worked for Brockham in London, before they were ever doing any T-shirts at any shows in Canada, Norman was doing Yes and all these other bands in the UK. So when it came time for us to go into the merchandise business, there was only one natural move, and that was to put Norman in charge. Arthur bumped up to become head of the concert division. I owned the company, and ultimately the buck stopped with me, but Arthur ran it and did a fantastic job.
How about by the time you got to doing worldwide tours and stuff like that? The first one, of course, with the Stones.
Yeah, 1989.
With Steel Wheels.
Actually, the first one was Michael Jackson,
with Victory.
1984.
Yeah.
Not the Stones.
Well, yeah, yes, but you were doing those with Chuck Sullivan. You took those over from Chuck Sullivan.
Yeah, well, you know, it's like for Spider-Man, I joked that I was the fireman who came in and put out the fire, but then I realized it all started with Michael Jackson, where the guys who owned the New England Patriots were the Sullivan family, and they somehow, through Don King and Michael's father, you figure it out, ended up with the Michael Jackson tour. We were doing the merchandise, borrowed like $3 million from a bank to do the Michael Jackson merchandise, which was $3 million we didn't have. And he had Thriller, so it's going to be the hottest tour ever. In fact, in my lifetime, there's never been an act that was as hot as Michael Jackson was that summer. And 4 weeks into the tour, I keep hearing these rumors that Chuck Sullivan from the Patriots is in trouble, and that the tour is in trouble. And it's impossible because it's selling out 3 nights. They're playing weekends only, every weekend. So I actually go to the tour, and I find out that actually they're going bankrupt. And Chuck is dead on his feet, which bothers me. But what really bothers me is that we're bankrupt if Michael goes off tour, because he'll never pay us back a penny of the money he owes us on the merch, and the tour is about to stop. So brazen as I was and am, I figured out a way to convince him that I should run the tour, because I actually know what I'm doing and he doesn't.
You took over after a couple months, so the tour was already out there too, was it?
Yeah. Well, what happened was I looked at the schedule and I noticed there was a weekend, October 5, 6, 7, I'm pretty sure. Although the last interview with you, I realized my memory is, I'm convinced it's right, but it's not as good as I think. But I think it was October 5, 6, 7. And I went to him and I said, listen, I know what your deal is. I know you're in trouble. I know you won't admit it to me. I know you're not playing Toronto. Come to Toronto that weekend, despite the fact that I think it was either Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, and the head rabbi of Toronto shows up in my office and starts beating on me and screaming at me, you're a Jew, how can you have a Michael Jackson show? And I had at least checked that we weren't going to start till after sundown. So I got him. But anyways, at the end of the day, I convinced him. I said to Chuck, I'll tell you what, Chuck, you come to Toronto, I'm going to pay you and Michael on a sellout. You do 3 nights at C&E Stadium, and then after that, I think you'll get me and hire me to do the rest of the tour. At the end of the show, the 3rd show, I walked in at the settlement. I said, Chuck, here's your check. Here's the check for Michael. And you made $100,000, and I think you did really well for a 1/3 partner. And he looked at me and said, you made twice as much as me? I said, I made twice as much as you, and I told you you need to hire me. And he actually hired us. It's going to be in the book, but he hired us for $1 million, and it was like the first time we'd ever made $1 million in our lives. But we got to run the rest of the tour, which was the worst experience we'd ever had in our lives to that point.
At that point, you also got to see that the American promoters that you basically had to fiefdom back to the days Frank Barcelona had set up, through Premier, all these little empires, if you want. And to some degree, CPI was that in Toronto, and Donald was that, and Tarleton was that in Montreal. You got to see that the regional promoters in the States, that CPI could work down there with no problem at all.
Yeah. Well, it was mostly Donald. I wanted to let everybody in, but he wanted to keep a tight little ship. But no, the thing that was interesting to me is, listen, as I said, and it was, you can talk about CPI, but Donald K. Donald was 50%. So everything that's really the history.
Why did you do the partnership?
Well,
I realized the forum, in Maple Leaf Gardens, there's a synergy there in the background, and Donald being a flamboyant character and whatever have you. Why did you make the partnership with Donald? What was the appeal? I mean, Montreal, why you didn't want to go in there?
There's a cute story that my memory, Donald's might be slightly different, but the gist of it is, there was a fellow named Hal Ray that represented the Bee Gees. He was at William Morris. And he called, and I had done some Ontario dates. We'd finally figured out how to make a little bit of money, and we'd done some dates. And Donald had done some dates east. And Hal called, and I think this is one of those things that backfired on the agent, where Hal said, Bee Gees are going to do a tour across Canada, we're going to do it with an orchestra, and we're going to only use one promoter. So I bid $10,000 a show. Donald bids 12.5. Hal calls back and says, Donald's bid 12.5. I bid 15. Donald bids 17.5. Hal calls back. As I recall, it was a Friday, but who knows? But Hal calls back and said, Donald's bid 17.5. Give me 20 and it's yours. I said, give me the weekend. And I put the phone down. Now, you have to, the context, in those days, Donald and I weren't exactly pals.
No.
We weren't enemies, but we were competitors.
You weren't pals with any other promoter. Let's face it.
No.
You weren't.
He became one of my best friends. But anyways, I mean, what was the State of the Union? We called the Ottawa building, tried to get a date. They said Donald's holding it. We called Donald's office to see if they're holding it. They said, we're not even holding it. So that was kind of the State of the Union. But anyways, I sat in my chair for 15 minutes, quite nervous and kind of going, am I really going to do this? And I just picked up the phone and I called Donald's office and I asked to speak to Donald. He picked up the phone. I don't think I even said hello. I just said, how are you doing, partner? I'm told he almost fell off his chair. And that was actually how we became partners. We tried it on a Bee Gees tour where we then decided, okay, now we'll bid a proper amount, forget the insanity that's been going on.
Did it also give you the fact that the two of you could team up first off, even if it was just Montreal, or let's say Quebec Maritimes, because Donald was down there, and Ontario, that gave you more negotiating power, certainly with agents in New York and abroad.
Well, listen, you think you have power, and everybody thinks they have power, and they rank these Power 500s, but all you have is the ability to focus and talk to people within your own sphere. So it didn't give us any power, but it certainly gave us an ability to not get whacked by the agents trying to...
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
They couldn't play the two of you against each other at all.
Exactly.
Like that. And soon from there, you go national. Donald did 2 tours, I remember. I think the first one might have been the Stampeders, followed by April Wine, and all of a sudden you guys are a national promoter. You start Periscope out in Vancouver without telling anybody that you owned it. And all of a sudden you're a national promoter doing 200, 300, 400 shows a year, and that's scary for a new organization. Well, it was.
No, it wasn't scary. It was ecstatic. It was exciting as hell. I mean, listen, the thing about the agents is Frank Barcelona and his empire, as you say, I think they always took themselves far too seriously. But what they wanted to determine what we could or couldn't do and could or couldn't make, and that was offensive to me, and that was not something that was ever going to happen. I mean, short term it could happen, but long term it wasn't going to be in the cards. That was just, we had to do what we had to do. And they started to think that we were getting too big and too controlling and too tough. So we took Norman Perry, who later became Brockham, and asked him if he wanted a partner and move to Vancouver. And essentially we said to him, look, don't tell anybody that it's Donald K. Donald and CPI. And the odd time you might even want to bid against us. Kind of don't lie, but don't volunteer it to anybody that you don't have to. And it worked nicely for a number of years. And in fact, until we actually decided enough of this crap and we admitted it, nobody really knew. Some people thought they knew, but nobody actually knew.
Let's skip forward a couple of years to where you break Bill Graham's heart.
I didn't break his heart.
Oh,
The
yes,
Rolling
you
Stones
did.
did.
Rolling
No,
Stones
the Rolling
did.
Stones
Okay,
did.
okay. Well, you put the inducement in front of them. Why did you think you could get that tour? I mean, you had to fly down and negotiate.
You want the long answer or the short one? The long one's a good story, though.
Okay, I'll go.
Because
You went-
it's never what people think, and they've read about it. It actually had nothing to do with. It's partly to do with the Michael Jackson tour, because that Michael Jackson tour, I learned as much as I could ever have learned at that stage of my career, because they went through all the NFL owners, and Chuck had deals that were the kind of deals that no manager, promoter, or agent would even imagine could exist. Getting paid by the stadium to bring the show instead of paying rent. And I always kept it in my brain, there is a day that information is going to be incredibly valuable to me.
It's a different formula the way it was before. Even if you work with local, you give them percentage. You had to pay for the building. You had to pay for concession.
You paid for everything.
Parking, everything.
He had the Cleveland Browns paying him to bring them Michael Jackson. And I sat there just going, this is a good lesson for the young Canadian to learn. But at the end of the day, what really happened was there was this amnesty show in Toronto, and I got a call in the middle of the afternoon, and it was one of our stage guys saying, this lunatic just screamed at me and told me I'm an absolute effing piece of shit.
Bill Graham.
And I'm going home. And I went, don't go home. Just like stay there. I'll be there any second. I got in the car and I went down. 3 in the afternoon, and I said to Bill, here's how it works. You don't talk to any of our people anymore. You just talk to me. I'll talk to our people. And then when we're finished, we're never going to work with you again. We're quite comfortable in our skin. We're Canadian. We're different. We do all of our different charity shows all year. You have no clue about it. And this kind of behavior we'll not do. And then I went to all of our people, Bob Mitchell, Steve Howard, etc. And I said, finish the day. Don't go home. And when we're done, we'll never work with Bill Graham again.
Which was hard because he had a lot of shows.
I didn't care. Right was right.
Yeah.
That was the end of the day. But that wasn't even enough. So now I'm sitting in the hot stove lounge at Maple Leaf Gardens having dinner with the fabulous Laurie McGoran, and I start getting a pain here. And I actually undo my belt, and it's freezing outside, but I turned to Laurie and I said, I got to go for a walk. I don't know what it is, but come and take me for a walk. Between the table and the door, I say, now take me to the hospital. There's absolutely something wrong. We go down to Mount Sinai, and lo and behold, I'm having a kidney stone.
Oh, God.
So now, not only do I have to go down to the show and do a job that I haven't done for years, and all my people are aggravated with me why they have to put up with this, I have a kidney stone, and clearly the kidney stone is Bill Graham's fault.
So Bill Graham lost to Rolling Stone on a kidney stone?
No, still not. The next morning I come into work, 10 o'clock, all my people walk into the office, and I go, I know, stop it. We're never working with Bill Graham again. I will never do that to you. You don't have to be embarrassed again. They go, no, boss. Bob Mitchell, I think, was elected. We're not here to say that. We're here to say the opposite. It's okay. We can work with Bill Graham. Because if we don't work with Bill Graham, we'll never get to work with the Rolling Stones, and that's the pinnacle of what we do. And I said, get out of here, go do your work. We're never working with Bill Graham again. I get out a pen, I start doodling. I doodle for about half an hour. I read for another half hour. And then I call a guy named Steve O'Rourke, who manages Pink Floyd, and who's a good friend of mine. And I went well with all of them. And I told him, I have a plan. I need you to introduce me to Prince Rupert Lowenstein, who looks after the Stones' money, as Mick calls him, his banker lately. But anyways, I say, Steve, you got to introduce me to Lowenstein. I'm going to put the Stones back together. And he said, they'll never do it. And I'm doing this just because I'm furious with Bill Graham, not because of any of the grand schemes that people think I had and the broad stroke visions and everything. It's just because screw this guy, and I made a promise to my people. And he says, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to give them $40 million for 40 shows. And he said, you're out of your mind. I said, no, I know what I'm doing.
You had a template from Victory, obviously.
Exactly. I used all the information from the Michael Jackson tour.
And let's not, you also had a war chest from the brewery.
No, I had no money.
No money?
No.
Okay.
I had no money.
Because that's always been
I was
written.
a partner with Labatt's, who said, I took them at their word. They said, if you bring us the right deal, we will finance it.
Okay.
So, I mean, Rupert called me. O'Rourke finally calls Rupert. Rupert called me and said, oh, young man, I understand you have something to say. And I said, well, didn't Steve tell you? And he said, yes, but I want to hear it from you. And I said, 40 million, 40 shows. And Rupert said, I'll meet you in New York tomorrow for lunch.
Oh, so it wasn't in the Bahamas, it was in New York.
It started in New York. In New York. And I met him the next day for lunch. And it was a very bizarre meeting for me because at the end of the lunch, he said, well, you've got the tour as far as I'm concerned. Now convince Mick and Keith.
It was that quick, like that? I mean, with Prince Rupert.
He'd had, I hate to talk badly about the dead, but he did it. He had a horrible relationship with Bill Graham and completely disliked him and was never going to work with him again. And so I just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the luckiest thing. But it was bizarre to me because he's the manager and like, what am I going to convince Mick and Keith? You have to go convince Mick and Keith. No, you have to go convince Mick and Keith. But anyways.
Maybe he had a kidney stone attack with Bill Graham too, as well, you know.
He might have. No, I think Bill called him the rotund one in Rolling Stone magazine. That's probably not a good start.
Not good at all. So you had to meet with Mick and Keith as well?
And I had to get the money from Labatt's, which was a great meeting. I went to the board meeting of Labatt's, and I presented my ideas and my budget, and they started asking me questions, and about 10 minutes into it, Peter Bronfman looked at the board and said, stop with the questions. You're either going into the rock music business or you're not. And if you can't support the Rolling Stones, why are we partners in this company? Now give them the money.
Let's go back to an earlier part of your career. You're the person responsible for bringing full frontal nudity on the clubs in Canada. I mean, come on, it's an. I
know, and we used recorded music.
Yeah, and recorded music too, like that. Why did you want to go into the entertainment business at all? Because it was so different from your father's world?
No, it wasn't that at all. It just seemed so exciting. I mean, truthfully, when I was younger and started my promoting company, if you said, okay, what do you want to be? What do you want to model yourself after? And what's your goal? My goal was to be Bill Graham. Not be Bill, but to be, the top guy.
No, but when you're 15 and 16, you don't know there's a Bill Graham unless you're reading Rolling Stones.
I didn't want to go in the music business when I was 15 or 16. I was just a little nothing in high school at Vaughan Road Collegiate.
What appealed to you about that world, though? The excitement of it?
Everything. I loved music.
Yeah.
And I hated work, so I thought if I could find a way to make money around music and not have to really work. And most of my career, I've never thought of it as a lot of work. But it's work, but with fun.
You didn't come from a musical family.
No. I played banjo when I was younger.
I will pay money to see you play, banjo. One show, please.
1965, I pawned it for an engagement ring.
Oh, isn't that sweet?
I know, but I got divorced from her, and I'd rather have the banjo back.
Maybe. You, much like a lot of us, we were joking. Bob Ezrin, of course, you've known forever, and he's in the front row. We all hung out in Yorkville in those days, which was pretty magic. If you weren't here, you'd go along the 2-3 streets and see all this incredible music. And I know that you would hang out at the Riverboat and places like that where Phil Oakes would play. There's all kinds of different people there. That must have been had an impression as well, too, because it certainly did on a lot of us.
It was amazing. I mean, I don't even know that it can happen anymore. But, Fiedler had the Riverboat, and Monday night he would have what they called hootenannies. And Toronto was always a great place for people to go. And they would come up here and they would spend time writing their songs or honing their craft or just visiting. And you could go down to the Riverboat, and on a Monday night, you never knew what you'd got. You might get Gord Lightfoot, Peter, Paul and Mary, Phil Oakes, any number of people that, coming through, and it was incredible.
The whole streets down there. And at the same time, there were concert promoters working here. I mean, there was Marty Onrott, but there was also John Brower with Thor Eaton and Kenny Walker had started doing the rock and roll revival show, the big shows at Varsity Stadium. I presume you would have gone to one of those, or maybe you weren't in town by then.
No, I went to the rock and roll revival.
You see John Lennon play with the plastic Ono band? Yeah. With the Doors?
And Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
Speaking of Mr. Ezrin, who's, I think in the end, the reason I go Alice Cooper, because if you were in Toronto then, it was like, what the hell have they got that guy on the show for? And then the show happened, and it was like, holy shit, did you see Alice Cooper?
That's the night of the chickens.
That was just, that would happen. And then, and it happened everywhere. I mean, suddenly Alice Cooper was everywhere in North America. It went from, and it could happen in no time. I imagine it still happens that way, but I don't feel it the way it used to.
The interesting thing about Alice Cooper in those days was the fact that he recorded in Toronto. He was here all the time. He did a television show when they did the Welcome to My Nightmare out at CFTO. So he was around. And the same thing, obviously Bob Ezrin was around. You took Bob Ezrin in a band. Or actually, you took it to Jack Richardson.
I took it to Jack, and he said, go see the kid at the end of the hall. And he said he might work with it. And I think by the time I got to the end of the hall, the quote was, Jack said you'll work with it. But ultimately, he did. I think their original name was Icarus.
Icarus, with Eddie Schwartz.
Eddie Schwartz, Hit Me With Your Best Shot. Later, Dixie Rump Roast, because they couldn't make it as Icarus. But that was the start of a lifelong relationship with Bob.
Were you a good manager? I asked that before, but I'm
obviously not. Obviously not. The band, I mean, sometimes you want to blame the band, but I'll always take it first and say, blame myself. I didn't do a very good job with that band, that's for sure.
The story of you losing money on a number of shows that you had with Simba Productions is well known. I don't really want to go through them too much, but the Buck Owens ones, everybody knows that Maple Leaf Gardens was half empty. There was hardly anybody. I was there.
There was no one in the stands.
Nobody.
Not
there.
One person.
And you did not come.
We had 2,300 people, and the floor held 2,500. I thought it was a good idea to move them all onto the floor so it might look like a crowd.
Why would you book Buck Owens in a non-country town?
Well, first of all, I was obviously an idiot in reflection, but it seemed perfectly logical at the time because I didn't know that the music business was, shockingly, somewhat corrupt. And so all of those #1 singles that I researched that Buck Owens had, and all of those #1 albums, I won't say they were, but they may have been purchased. So I had this guy who had 8 or 9 #1 singles and 5 #1 albums, and suddenly the #1 television show.
In the United States, Michael, not Toronto. Non-country town.
You want to call it a non-country town? It's not true.
Obviously, it was true that night.
It was the wrong act. We're not going to have that debate. But I thought it made perfect sense. And by the way, of course, I'd been pounding the beat trying to get any rock act on earth to play for me, and they wouldn't. Because between Martin Onrut, maybe Donald K. Donald too, I don't know. But between Martin Onrut and whatever the powers that be were, nobody would talk to me, let alone deal with me. And Jack McFadden, who was the manager of Buck Owens at the time, he talked to me, and he saw me coming. Here comes the idiot.
For $25,000.
25 grand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was a big payday.
50 grand too much.
Which is a big payday for Buck Owens at that particular time. Wouldn't it made sense in retrospect to start off with maybe a smaller venue? Maple Leaf Gardens was like, whoa, that's big.
I don't want to be defensive, but I'll just say we've all got perfect hindsight, don't we?
Yeah, we don't. No, but true. I mean, you went for the biggest hall in Toronto. Why not go club date?
It doesn't surprise me.
No. You obviously had ambition.
It's a habit. It's a habit that I had even back then.
What, overreaching?
No, I don't think so. I think if we look at the career, it hasn't overreached at all. I think it's reached. You can't succeed all the time.
No, you can't. Some people said you overreached with Spider-Man, but that's paying off.
Oh, wow. I think there's no question that there were moments that we were overreaching because you never know what the end result's going to be till you get on the journey, until the journey's finished. But in the end, listen, if I was more of a performer, I'd stand up and pound my chest over Spider-Man. It's the worst project I ever got involved in and the greatest triumph of my entire career by a country mile.
I think one of the aspects of Spider-Man is how it was so misunderstood in terms of the gestation, going from working script, if you want, to getting actually on stage, by the time you even got involved, it had lost, or not lost, it had spent quite a bit of money already.
No, it had lost $20 million. You're right.
Yeah, and people forget that when they start adding up, figures of 60, 70, 75 million. They forget how costly it is, even at the very beginning of a Broadway show. And unfortunately, because you guys came in after the show was about to go bankrupt, well, was going bankrupt, you got hammered with a lot of the press and the different things that came with that.
Well, listen.
Worst reviews I've ever seen.
I've seen worse, but they were bad. I
Yeah.
agree, but it's hyperbole to say the worst. But the funny thing, listen, we got hammered. I really like working on shows. So whether it's a Broadway show, it's a rock show, it's a tennis match, whatever it is, I really enjoy that process.
What do you enjoy about the process? Because
It's
obviously the people are just
it's starting with this side of the page.
Yeah.
There's nothing there, is there?
No.
And then suddenly, at the end of it, you're standing in a venue. People are standing, hopefully, smiling and cheering. There are people on stage taking bows, and you had something to do with it. So the way I described it to my kids and said, if you want to get into showbiz, you might consider, none of them have taken me up on it. I said, but if you're not going to be the guy on stage, which Liam is, in a great new band called The Treasures, look out, April 2nd, Universal.
And Jacob is a filmmaker.
But the point I'm going to make is I always said to them, if you're not going to be the guy on stage, I have the next best job. And if you want to be in entertainment and be in show business, that's what attracts me to it.
And it's obviously, besides the business aspect that is labeled with you quite often, obviously there's a creative role there as well too.
Absolutely. Well, it's everything's creative. I mean, put on your shirt in the morning, you're being creative. You're looking in the mirror and you're trying to look your best, and some people might not look, but they still, there's nothing you do in life that isn't part of art and part of the art of life and part of being creative. So I just wanted to do it for money. I didn't want to, I didn't want to do something that bored me. This doesn't bore me. I'm still excited about getting up in the morning, most mornings, except when the back hurts, and going to the office.
To paraphrase Bono, you had to fire Picasso. That's a creative decision. And we're talking about firing director Julie Taymor, who I know you got involved with this project for a couple of reasons. One was Julie, but also obviously you two guys. How do you fire Picasso? And how did you know you were in trouble?
I read the reviews. No.
You did not read the reviews.
First, I did.
Somebody gave them,
I knew I was in trouble long before I read the reviews.
You don't listen to critics anyway, so come on.
Listen. When everybody on earth tells you the same thing that you had already thought on your own, you got to go, it might be true. But I just knew I was in trouble. I had enough experience to know, the number one thing in what I do, the absolute number one thing in what I do is to have the stubborn confidence of my own beliefs and to stick to them. And whether it's Spider-Man or Pink Floyd, I mean, one of the great stories goes back to 1987 when Roger Waters has left Pink Floyd. And again, we're in the merchandise business. And one of those other companies that nobody knew at the time I'm going to talk about was an agency called ITG that was probably the number 2 agency in the world. But, how do you stop agents from telling you can't go where you want to go and do what you want to do? Sounds like a Mamas and Papas song, right? And make the money you want. Well, you start your own agency and you represent David Bowie and Pink Floyd and Phil Collins and Genesis, and that's what we did. But nobody knew. Now, all of a sudden, there's going to be a Pink Floyd tour, and it's like the weekend before the on sale. And all the promoters in North America are choking. So not only and Steve O'Rourke is canceling the tour, my agency's not going to make any money, my merchandise company is going to go bankrupt for the 45th time, and holy shit, what do? Same thing as Spider-Man. You go home and you go, what's the real equity in this? And the equity is the music and the name of the band. So I called Steve O'Rourke, like Chuck Sullivan, and I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put the C&E Stadium on sale, because they'd gone from we're doing a stadium tour to we're doing an arena tour to we're doing no tour. I said, why don't we just do the real market research? I will put the CNE Stadium on sale. I will hold 2 other nights because they're all insane. You're the biggest band in the world. It's going to be 3 nights. And if I'm wrong, David Gilmour, will get sick. And we'll tell the world the tour's canceled.
One of the things you're talking about...
They sold out 3 shows the first day.
One of the things I have found... Oh, by the way, we've got about 12 minutes left. I'm not going to take questions. What I am going to do, if within the next 5 minutes, if you have a question, would you write it down, put it here, and I will go through very quickly and take a couple questions, okay? It's just that this was a short 55-minute tour, but I will take questions if they're here, except from Ezrin.
But let me just get back to the answer, because your question was, how do you know to fire Picasso?
Well, how do you...
Well, because I learned on that Pink Floyd that every now and then you got to find the quiet moment of your own beliefs, and you, as I said, you got to be stubborn in your convictions, and that taught me that when I was lying on the beach in Florida with Laurie, and we actually opened the first preview of Spider-Man without an ending. I know this sounds unbelievable, and it is beyond belief. But we were out of money, and we had a choice of finding more money, which I knew I wasn't capable of doing because we were so beyond reality at the 65 million, or we were at 55 million then, that there was just no chance to find money in time. So we either opened without an ending, and what that means is at least when you open you get the money from the box office, so we could actually use that money to continue to fix the show, but we had no ending. It hadn't been written. So that's like scene 1. Scene 2 is 2 weeks later, lying on a beach in Florida. The press are trashing the shit out of us, unfairly to some degree and fairly to some degree. Unfairly because the New York Times called the show vulgar before the script was written. You figure that one out. But I'm lying on the beach and it hits me. It's like you have these epiphanies. I said, Julie and Glenn Berger, the other writer, and Bono and Edge and everybody have had 8 years to come up with an ending to this show. They're not going to come up with it next month or next month. We're done. We're finished. So I came up with a plan. Crazy enough, I came up with an ending, and I came up with a plan. And it took me about, how do you fire Picasso? It took me 7-8 weeks to get Bono and Edge to agree because we were like the board of directors. You had to get all the partners. And, well, Bono and Edge were partners. Julie was a partner. I was a partner. Marvel's a partner. Marvel had agreed before I even thought of the ending of what to do with the show.
One of the interesting things, you were talking about equity in projects and stuff like that, and a direct line can be made back from the early days of CPI, where CPI invested in an agency, the agency, Love Productions, which was Daffodil Records, if you want, Brockham, which was merchandising, all the way through BCL, the Grand Entertainment, when you did the same type of thing, into what you started to do at Live Nation. In terms of, the deals with Jay-Z, I mean, the money in Madonna and people like that. Obviously, money is quite a bit different over the period of time. I don't think Crowbar made Madonna money, but the whole idea is to control or work with the whole creative and the whole aspect, every aspect of an artist's career, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, that was the plan from the beginning, like I said in our interview. Yeah. I'm somewhere between having had a very successful career or never accomplishing that idea. But listen, the business is so, split up and divisive that it just never made sense to me that when I was, in the beginning, when I was promoting concerts, truthfully, I had no respect for or relationship with the record labels who, none of them would ever admit, had no respect for or relationship with the promoter. Makes no sense. Today when you look back, how stupid is that and how insane? Well, it's kind of like the industry didn't own MTV, baseball didn't own ESPN. It's always easy to look back. But my plan always was that if you could get all of the various areas moving in the same direction and everybody saying blue at the same time, it would just be better.
How do you sell that to, Live Nation at the beginning? I realize you went in there when SFX bought you, and, you went in there working thing is go, okay, guys, we're going to do this. We're going to go for Madonna. Oh, by the way, it's going to cost $100 million. That's a pretty big risk. Oh, by the way, we're going to do it with YouTube. By the way, we're going to do it like that. That's a lot of money on the table at any particular time. And that's not an easy sell.
Actually, it was an easy sell in the beginning. In the beginning, it was an easy sell. They made the deal.
Okay.
I was kind of like not doing a whole lot, and I was a free agent, as they would say in sports. And we had offers from Bob Sillerman to go and start a new company. We had offers from Live Nation. And I just thought it would be a lot easier at Live Nation because a lot of the people who'd worked with us were still there, and we wouldn't have to go create a whole new staff. But I wasn't interested in going back into the concert promoting business. I was interested in doing this, the 360 deals, as they coined the phrase.
And obviously the numbers you had worked out and somebody else hadn't worked out, and yet at the same time, you could turn to a Madonna and go, I know how we can make money here, obviously, and you had to show your partners or show the Live Nation people, here's how we're going to do it.
Yeah. Well, listen, we were right. Let me just tell you, when you look back, there's no question, and the industry is still too bifurcated. I mean, 360, I think it's one of those things, in 100 years, people are going to look back and they're going to go, how the heck did they do that craziness back then? Because, and our plan, by the way, was in the beginning, everybody was going to be really expensive, but we wanted to line up 4 or 5 superstars and think that the rest of the business would be the tail, and we'd be the dog wagging it and bringing it along, because our ultimate plan wasn't to have any money invested with bands. It was just to show them this is a better way and to be partners with them. And it is.
Why get into the development side of the business with Zach Brown and Paula Natuni that have worked out, don't get me wrong, but that's where normally the biggest investment in the business and the biggest loss, as you well know, is 1 out of 10 groups happen. Yes, you can use the clout, if you want, of Live Nation, getting them bookings and shows and whatever have you. Why get in that side? That seems like penny ante beer money on the table.
No, it's the opposite, actually. It's the art of business, and it's the business of art. The business of art and the business side of it still is, what would you rather do? Take $100 million and go 3.5 years to recoup, and then 1.5 years, and then renew, or have the same partnership and have nothing invested and accomplish ultimately the same thing? Well, if we could do a Rolling Stones or a Bruce Springsteen or whatever tour with no money, that's a whole lot more fun than it is putting up $100 million and going home and going, holy shit. I mean, when we went to Barbados and signed the first deal in 1989 with the Rolling Stones and gave them a check for $40 million and got back on the plane, there's a picture in our office of me strangling Norman Perry and screaming, now we've bankrupted the company. You were supposed to stop me from doing this. So in a pure business sense, you want to work with the baby bands. In an artistic sense, it's even more fun to be involved from the beginning, and you can contribute more. It's hard to tell Mick what song to play.
Obviously, you couldn't sell Rapino and Arthur on Motley Crue.
A mistake on their part, or maybe a weakness on my part. I can't sell every deal. The deal would have been made money.
Was that the breaker?
No, I think the breaker was like 1,000 things, and I finally lost my temper and just scared the shit out of Rapino. So
why didn't you go lie on the beach? Maybe come back over the weekend and go,
Oh, I'd done that a lot of times.
Yeah. Do you regret leaving?
No. I mean, I'm not a kind of person that regrets a lot. I regret some things. I regret doing the deal in the first place. In Live Nation.
Okay, what deal we're talking about? Because we could almost have a trivia question on how many deals that you've made with Live Nation.
Well, I sold them a company that I was about to form, and then became vice chairman of Live Nation.
Which company is that? Because again, we could have a trivia question.
You remember the name better than I do.
Would that be Grand, BSL?
Which one? It was called Artist Nation. They call it Artist Nation now.
Right. Okay, that was your company. Okay. going into the family entertainment side of the business, that's like a trailblazer. You got a couple things, tours coming up. You got Super Y coming up. My favorite, Yabba Gabba, which is fantastic.
Yo Gabba Gabba.
Yeah, Yo Gabba Gabba. Pardon me. We both have had kids where we've had to train through this and watch that. Exciting world for you because it's so different.
I love it. Well, first of all, you know, as a promoter, you have a particular function to play. As a producer, you have a completely different function to play. You actually are integral to the creation of the piece itself, as opposed to taking a piece that someone else brings you. They've done their album, they've created their show, and you then market it. As a producer, you start with, I had a meeting with, one of the shows we're doing is Bat Out of Hell, and I sat with the writer 2 weeks ago who said, oh, and the director, so what do you want? That's a completely different thing than what I used to do as a promoter. It's a whole new career. So
it's also being on the creative floor right at the beginning too.
And you take it all the way to the same thing I used to do. Eventually, it'll be a piece that we're going to put on stage, and I'll put on my promoter hat. Go ahead.
We got one question here. And, what are the best ways for emerging artists to forge an ongoing relationship with in-demand concert promoters? Play the bar mitzvah, play the...
You got to play. I'm a big believer in playing everything.
Everything,
it's like,
yeah.
I don't think you can hurt yourself by playing a bar mitzvah or by playing any small gig. And if and when you become a success, the people that were there will brag that they were there, and the people that weren't there, who you pick up along the way, they won't know you did the bar mitzvah. It won't mean anything. But the best thing you can do is find a good manager. That's how you get the in-demand promoters.
Plus, write good songs.
Absolutely.
You know, right within there. You've got a lot on the go right now. The shows that we, have already talking about. Spider-Man going into Las Vegas, hopefully. Germany, the other place. That's a lot of very demanding.
I think we're going to do the Spider-Man arena show before we ever go to Germany.
Okay.
I think the next thing after Vegas will be a Spider-Man arena show.
That's a tough transition too, isn't it? I mean, you can't go in there for a couple of nights. You got to go in for like a couple of weeks.
I hope it's not a tough transition. I'm not looking for tough projects after this last one, but we know what to do. We've got a redesign ready, and I think it can be a much better show in arenas. I mean, it can be pretty crazy when you use all that space. It was really hard. It should have been an arena show from the beginning. I mean, the space in a theater is this. Space in arena is this. The stuff we can do is incredible.
We're right on the moment, and I'm going to ask one last question. 7 years for Spider-Man on Broadway. You're at 5 now. People don't realize...
No, we're at 3.
We're at 3, pardon me. It's named one of the top 20 Broadway shows of all time in terms of the grosses. You're going to get 7 years out of it? That's what you have said is the record in terms of breaking even.
No, I think I said 5, and we will definitely get 5 years out of it. But who knows? Listen, we could be there for 15 years, I hope.
Another Broadway show?
Bat Out of Hell, Blues Brothers, that's 2 that we're working on, and a few others.
Thank you very much. I thank Michael for being here. I thank you for being here. Thank you.